The year was 1864, and the American Civil War was entering its bloodiest phase. The Union and Confederate forces were locked in a brutal struggle, each side desperate for a decisive victory. Amidst the chaos, one name stood out: General George Armstrong Custer, a young and ambitious cavalry commander known for his boldness and flair. But even the most celebrated leaders face moments that test their mettle, and for Custer, that moment came at the Battle of Trevilian Station. The Union Army, under the command of General Sheridan, had launched a daring raid deep into Confederate territory. Their mission? To disrupt enemy supply lines and draw Confederate forces away from the main front. Custer's brigade, tasked with leading the charge. But what seemed like a straightforward mission would soon spiral into one of the most intense and chaotic cavalry battles of the war. In this video, we'll uncover the untold story of Trevilian Station, a battle that tested Custer's leadership and reshaped the course of the Civil War. We'll explore the events leading up to the conflict, the key figures involved, and the dramatic moments that defined the battle. From daring cavalry charges to desperate stands, this is a story of courage, strategy, and the high stakes of war. So, join us as we step back in time to June 1864, to a small railroad station in Virginia, where history was made and where one man's leadership was put to the ultimate test. To fully understand the Battle of Trevilian Station, we need to step back and examine the broader context of the American Civil War in 1864. By this point, the war had dragged on for 3 grueling years, with neither side able to deliver a knockout blow. The Union, under President Abraham Lincoln, was determined to crush the Confederacy and restore the nation. Meanwhile, the Confederacy, led by President Jefferson Davis, fought fiercely to preserve its way of life and independence. The stakes were high, and the pressure was mounting on both sides. In the Eastern Theater, General Ulysses S. Grant had taken command of the Union Army, bringing a new aggressive strategy to the fight. Unlike his predecessor, Grant was willing to engage in prolonged, bloody campaigns to wear down the Confederate. His plan was simple but brutal: attack relentlessly, exploit the Union's superior resources, and force the Confederacy into submission. This strategy set the stage for the Overland Campaign, a series of battles that would culminate in the Siege of Petersburg and, ultimately, the fall of Richmond, the Confederate capital. It was during this campaign that General Sheridan, one of Grant's most trusted subordinates, proposed a bold plan. Sheridan believed that a large-scale cavalry raid into Confederate territory could disrupt supply lines, destroy railroads, and divert enemy forces from the main front. Grant approved the plan, and Sheridan assembled a force of over 8,000 cavalrymen for the mission. Among them was the young and ambitious General George Armstrong Custer, already a rising star in the Union Army. Custer's presence in the raid was no accident. At just 24 years old, he had already made a name for himself with his daring tactics and fearless leadership. A graduate of West Point, Custer had quickly risen through the ranks, earning a reputation as a bold and charismatic commander. But his brashness also made him a controversial figure. Some saw him as a hero, others as reckless. The Trevilian Station raid would be his chance to prove his critics wrong, or confirm their worst fears. On the Confederate side, the cavalry was led by General Hampton, a seasoned and respected commander. Hampton came from a wealthy South Carolina family and had no formal military training, but his natural leadership and tactical acumen made him a formidable opponent. He was determined to protect his homeland and had already proven his skill in earlier battles. Alongside him was General Fitzhugh Lee, nephew of the legendary Robert E. Lee. Together, they commanded a force of roughly 6,000 cavalrymen, ready to defend their territory at all costs. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation. Sheridan's raid began on June 7, 1864, as his cavalry moved south from. Their target was the Virginia Central Railroad, a critical supply line for the Confederates. If the Union could destroy this railroad, it would cripple the Confederacy's ability to move troops and supplies. But the Confederates were not about to let that happen without a fight. As Sheridan's forces advanced, Tensions mounted. Both sides knew that the outcome of this raid could have far-reaching consequences. For the Union, it was an opportunity to gain the upper hand. For the Confederates, it was a matter of survival. The Battle of Trevilian Station was not just a clash of armies. It was a test of leadership, strategy, and resolve. And for George Custer, it would be a defining moment in his career. As Sheridan's Union cavalry moved deeper into Confederate territory, the tension in the air was palpable. The mission was clear: strike swiftly, destroy the Virginia Central Railroad, and disrupt Confederate supply line. But the Confederates, led by Generals Wade Hampton and Fitzhugh Lee, were determined to stop them. What followed was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, with both sides maneuvering for advantage in the dense Virginia countryside. Sheridan's strategy relied on speed and surprise. His force of over 8,000 cavalrymen was divided into 3 divisions, with Custer commanding one of them. The plan was to move quickly, avoid prolonged engagements, and focus on the objective, the railroad. However, the Confederates were not caught off guard. Hampton and Lee had been tracking Sheridan's movements and were prepared to intercept him. They knew the importance of the Virginia Central Railroad and were ready to defend it at all costs. The first major encounter occurred on June 11, 1864, near Trevilian Station, a small railroad depot in Louisa County, Virginia. Custer's division, leading the Union advance, stumbled upon Confederate forces under General Hampton. What began as a skirmish quickly escalated into a full-blown battle. Custer, ever the bold commander, saw an opportunity to strike a decisive blow. He ordered his men to charge, hoping to overwhelm the Confederates with sheer force and momentum. But Hampton was no ordinary opponent. A seasoned commander with a deep understanding of cavalry tactics, he anticipated Custer's move. As Custer's men charged, they found themselves surrounded by Confederate forces. The tables had turned, and Custer's brigade was now in a precarious position. Cut off from the rest of Sheridan's force, they faced the very real possibility of being wiped out. This was a critical moment for Custer. His decision to charge had put his men in danger, but retreat was not an option. Instead, he rallied his troops and fought fiercely to hold their ground. The battle raged for hours, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Custer's leadership during this desperate stand would later be praised, but in the moment it was a brutal test of endurance and resolve. Meanwhile, Sheridan was facing challenges of his own. As he pushed forward, he realized that the Confederates were not just defending Trevilian Station. They were launching counterattacks. Hampton and Lee had coordinated their efforts, using the terrain to their advantage. The dense woods and narrow roads made it difficult for Sheridan's larger force to maneuver, and the Confederates exploited this to the fullest. One of the key turning points came when Confederate forces managed to capture a significant portion of the Union supply train. This was a major setback for Sheridan, as it left his men short on ammunition and provisions. The loss forced him to reconsider his strategy. Should he continue pushing toward the railroad, risking further losses, or retreat and regroup? Sheridan chose the latter, ordering his forces to pull back and consolidate. For Custer, the retreat was a bitter pill to swallow. He had fought valiantly, but the battle had exposed the risks of his aggressive style. It was a lesson in the importance of caution and coordination, one that would stay with him for the rest of his career. As the Union forces withdrew, the Confederates celebrated a tactical victory. They had successfully defended the Virginia Central Railroad and inflicted heavy casualties on Sheridan's cavalry. But the battle was far from over. Both sides knew that the conflict at Trevilian Station was just one chapter in a larger struggle, one that would continue to shape the course of the war. The Battle of Trevilian Station reached its boiling point on June 12, 1864, as the Union and Confederate forces clashed in a series of intense and chaotic engagements. The stakes were higher than ever, and every decision carried life or death consequences. For General George Armstrong Custer, this day would become one of the most defining moments of his career. a test of his leadership, courage, and ability to adapt under fire. The morning began with Custer's brigade positioned near Trevilian Station, isolated from the rest of Sheridan's force. Despite the previous day's setbacks, Custer was determined to turn the tide. He ordered his men to prepare for another assault, hoping to break through the Confederate lines and rejoin Sheridan. But the Confederates, led by General Wade Hampton, were ready. They had fortified their positions and were prepared to repel any attack. As Custer's men advanced, they were met with a hail of gunfire and artillery. The Confederates had the advantage of terrain, using the dense woods and elevated positions to their benefit. Custer's charge, though bold, quickly turned into a desperate struggle. His troops were outnumbered and outgunned, and the situation grew increasingly dire. At one point, Custer himself was nearly captured, narrowly escaping thanks to the quick thinking of his men. The fighting was fierce and unrelenting. Sabers clashed, bullets whizzed through the air, and the cries of wounded men echoed across the battlefield. Amidst the chaos, Custer's leadership shone through. He moved tirelessly among his troops, rallying them to hold their ground. His presence was a source of inspiration, but it also made him a target. Confederate sharpshooters focused their fire on him, recognizing the impact his fall would have on Union morale. Meanwhile, General Sheridan was grappling with his own challenges. Realizing that Custer's brigade was in grave danger, he ordered a relief force to push through and assist them. This decision was not made lightly. Sheridan knew that diverting resources to rescue Custer could jeopardize the overall mission, but he also understood the importance of preserving his cavalry's strength. The relief force fought its way through Confederate resistance, finally reaching Custer's beleaguered troops in the late afternoon. The arrival of reinforcements marked a turning point in the battle. With fresh troops at their side, Custer's men launched a counterattack, driving the Confederates back and reclaiming lost ground. The fighting was brutal, with both sides suffering heavy casualties, but the Union forces managed to hold their position, preventing a complete collapse. For the Confederates, the battle was a mixed outcome. While they had successfully defended the Virginia Central Railroad and inflicted significant losses on the Union, they had failed to deliver a decisive blow. General Hampton, though proud of his men's efforts, knew that the Union cavalry remained a formidable threat. The battle had exposed the limits of Confederate resources and highlighted the growing strain on their war effort. As the sun set on June 12, the battlefield fell silent, save for the groans of the wounded and the crackling of fires. The human cost of the battle was staggering. Hundreds lay dead or injured, their lives forever changed by the events of those 2 days. For the survivors, the battle was a stark reminder of the horrors of war and the sacrifices it demanded. Custer, though physically unscathed, was deeply affected by the experience. The battle had tested his leadership in ways he had never imagined, forcing him to confront the consequences of his decisions. His boldness had saved his brigade from annihilation, but it had also placed them in grave danger. It was a lesson in the delicate balance between courage and caution, one that would stay with him for the rest of his career. The Battle of Trevilian Station was not just a clash of armies. It was a human drama played out on a grand scale. It was a story of bravery and sacrifice, of leaders grappling with impossible choices, and of ordinary men thrust into extraordinary circumstances. As we reflect on this pivotal moment in history, we are reminded of the enduring impact of those who fought and died on that Virginia battlefield. The Battle of Trevilian Station left behind a harrowing scene of destruction. The battlefield was littered with the dead and wounded, a grim testament to the ferocity of the fighting. Union forces, though battered, had managed to hold their ground and avoid a complete disaster. General Sheridan, recognizing the toll the battle had taken on his men, decided to abandon the raid and return to Union lines. The Virginia Central Railroad remained intact, a symbolic victory for the Confederates, but one that came at a high cost. For the Confederacy, the battle was a tactical success, but a strategic strain. While they had repelled Sheridan's raid, their resources were stretched thin, and the loss of experienced cavalrymen was a blow they could ill afford. On the home front, news of the battle was met with mixed reactions. Southern newspapers hailed it as a victory, but the growing toll of the war was becoming impossible to ignore. For the Union, The battle was a sobering reminder of the challenges they still faced in defeating a determined enemy. In the long term, the Battle of Trevilian Station had significant implications for the Civil War. It highlighted the importance of cavalry in modern warfare and underscored the challenges of conducting deep raids into enemy territory. For General Custer, the battle was a turning point. While his boldness had saved his brigade, it also exposed the risks of his aggressive style. The lessons he learned at Trevilian Station would shape his approach in future battles, including his infamous last stand at Little Bighorn. Politically, the battle reinforced the Union's commitment to a strategy of total war. The failure of Sheridan's raid did not deter Union leaders. Instead, it strengthened their resolve to cripple the Confederacy's infrastructure and resources. This approach would ultimately contribute to the Union's victory in 1865. The Battle of Trevilian Station also serves as a reminder of the human cost of war. It was a clash of ideals, strategies, and wills, but it was also a story of individual courage and sacrifice. The men who fought there, on both sides, were driven by a sense of duty and belief in their cause. Their legacy is a testament to the complexities of history and the enduring impact of their choices. The Battle of Trevilian Station stands as a pivotal yet often overlooked chapter in the American Civil War. It was a clash that tested the limits of leadership, strategy, and endurance, leaving an indelible mark on those who fought and on the course of the war itself. For General George Armstrong Custer, it was a defining moment that showcased both his boldness and the risks of his aggressive tactics. For the Confederacy, it was a hard-fought victory that came at a steep cost, further straining their dwindling resources. And for the Union, it was a sobering reminder of the challenges they faced in their quest to restore the nation. As we look back on the Battle of Trevilian Station, we are left with a thought-provoking question. What does it truly mean to lead in times of crisis? The decisions made by Custer, Sheridan, Hampton, and others shaped the outcome of this battle, and, in turn, the course of history. Their stories challenge us to reflect on the complexities of leadership and the enduring impact of our choices. What do you think about the Battle of Trevilian Station and its place in history? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to explore more stories from the past that continue to shape our present. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history.